Hi, everyone, and welcome to our series, Coping with Crisis. And we're going to start a new study this week, and we're going to start looking at anxiety, which is a big deal for a lot of people. And so we're going to take a couple sessions to look at anxiety because more and more people are having anxiety. As a counselor, as a pastor, I'm seeing that this last year of what everyone went through has brought on a lot of anxiety, and people are having a hard time dealing with it. And so sometimes people are having panic attacks. They feel this over sense of dread or doom about the future, and they're looking for outlets, and unfortunately sometimes those outlets are not healthy for them. But there's an overall sense of anxiety. It puts people on edge. It makes people angry, tired, fatigued, depressed, hopeless, helpless, the whole thing. And so we want to talk a little bit about anxiety and how to understand it, how to deal with it, how to process it, and so that we can lessen our anxiety and understand how to deal with the way the things in the world are happening and where it's going. Because as Bible students, we know that, a lot of the things that happened in the world this last year and is getting ready to happen is all been prophesied. It's been talked about that these things will begin to happen as you draw near to the end, to the tribulation period. And so we're seeing a setup for that, and really nothing's going to stop that. And so our lives have left what we thought was normal now to this new norm. And this new norm gives people a lot of anxiety. And so as believers, we have to learn how to cope with that because there's ways of looking at problems. There's coping problems and there's curable problems. And with what's happening in the world, a lot of what's happening is not curable by any of us. God's going to have to cure it later on in the tribulation and at the second coming. So therefore, this is a coping problem for us. And we have to cope well so we don't get anxiety. But just so that we are all clear about what anxiety is, let's then unpack that a little bit. Anxiety comes from basically a fear of the future, a future situation that might occur, and it gives us a sense of doom or dread or hopelessness or helplessness. And this is why most Christians don't like to look at prophecy. They don't like to see what's happening in the world and pay attention to what's happening in the world because it makes them afraid of the future. Prophecy makes them afraid of the future, but that's a misinterpretation of prophecy. Prophecy should prepare you for the future. It actually increases your faith. It actually increases your trust in the Lord because what's happening has been foretold. But when people misinterpret this, when they don't perceive things correctly, they get anxiety from prophecy. They get anxiety from current events. And so therefore they detach. They don't want to deal with it. It's too much for them. And they don't want to have anxiety. They don't like that feeling of a state of doom or dread. And so they avoid it. But that's unfortunate because that's not what prophecy is supposed to do. That is coming from the person's way of perceiving things, a way of perceiving reality. That's not biblical, but it comes typically from their experiences in life, what they were taught, comes from their hurts, their traumas, and things of that nature. So all that stuff in the past is messing up how they see current events or what might be happening in the future. And so we have to unravel that. And so again, anxiety is related to how you are perceiving the future. Okay, that's how it is. And that's different than stress. Okay, anxiety is related to worry. Okay, so worry projects into the future. Okay, so that's why worry is a sin. Anxiety could be considered a sin as well because the person is fearing that which he shouldn't or she shouldn't fear. It's an abnormal fear. It's a dread. It's building up something that's bigger than what it is. It's catastrophizing. Now, some people say, well, anxiety is like stress. No, it's not. Stress is totally different. So you don't want to confuse the two. I think it's important to understand the difference between stress and anxiety. In stress, there's good stress and there's bad stress, okay? Stress is part of our environment. It actually helps us. And stress is an external demand that's put on us, okay? And that could be a good stress or a bad stress, but it's an external demand. So say you're in school and you have a test coming up. That's an external demand. That's good for us because it makes us and causes us to want to study so we can get a good grade. Or we have a job review coming up, so that makes us get on the ball at work. And that's a good stress. It makes us rise to the occasion, and we meet that calling, that demand, that challenge. We step up to the plate, and that's what good stress does, okay? So whether it's deadlines at work, goals, all those things are good stressors, things we need to get done, and it motivates us to do good things. That actually builds us up, that strengthens us, and we need stress, good stress. And when you see people that don't have any stress on them, a goal to meet, a deadline to meet, whatever that might be, it actually hurts them because they don't rise to the occasion. They actually start regressing, and they regress mentally, they regress physically, they regress spiritually, and they regress emotionally. And that's why it's not a good thing. Even in, let's say you were independently wealthy and you never had to work another day in your life and all your stress is gone, that would not be a healthy situation for an individual because it would be stress-free, and that causes a person to regress. We're not built for not having stress. We're actually built for good stress. We grow, we learn, and things of that nature. Let me tell you something a little bit more about stress. There's bad stress. The bad stress that comes in our lives are things happening to us, obviously, from the outside, and the stress is more than which we can bear, and it's longer than what it's supposed to be. So it has to do with the amount, and it has to do with the length of it. So each one of us can deal with added stress from work, or for a season of time. Maybe some companies get busy during Christmas time, or it's an agriculture job and they get have more stress on them, more demand on them during harvest time or something like that. There's seasons in their job that make them have a little bit more stress, and they know it's a season and it comes to an end and whatnot. But then if the stress is too much and goes longer than the season, so we're talking about duration and amount, then that's when it becomes bad stress. And a lot of bad things happen from that. People start having breakdowns. They physically get fatigued. They can get depressed. They can have all kinds of physiological responses to that demand that was too much and too long. So that's what stress is. Stress is coming from the outside on us. Anxiety comes from the inside of us. It comes from worry, but it comes from inside of us. Okay? And that's what I want to make sure we know the difference between the two. So some people say, I'm stressed out, when really they're anxiety oriented. So you got to know the difference to make sure you know what you're dealing with, because you handle stress differently many times than you would anxiety. Okay, see, like if you get stressed from the outside, you can relieve that stress by getting away from the stressor. So I get away from work, I take a vacation, I take a break. I can get away from the stress and get some relief, or I can get more rest or something like that. With anxiety, because it comes from the inside, you can't ever get away from it. It's part of you. It's a state of being, a state of mind, a state of emotions. Okay? You can't get away from it because you carry it. So no matter where you put yourself on vacation, you can still have anxiety on vacation. You can have anxiety at work or wherever you might be. Anxiety when you take a walk, or anxiety when you're exercising. It never leaves you because it comes from within, and it creates a state of mind or a state of emotions. So with anxiety, it is typically a fear response of you or me anticipating something in the future And so it's always going to be future oriented, and it's centered around some type of dread or a doom that's coming to us. And so the brain then starts giving us signals to us saying, hey, something bad is about to happen. So comes from your thinking, and it gives signals to your body. And so this is where the anxiety starts striking up in ourselves because of the way we are thinking. Our thinking is controlling the anxiety or causing the anxiety. And so we're typically worried about some type of bad outcome. So if we know prophecy or something and we say, hey, look, we're going to the one world government, or there's a digital currency coming, that kind of person takes that and does a doomsday thing with it, and all of a sudden creates anxiety for that. They start worrying about all the bad outcomes, even though something may not have happened or is yet to happen, or they simply don't trust God to protect them. They don't trust God to see them through it, and so they catastrophize, we call it. They blow the situation up more than normal. And it is a lack of faith. There's no doubt about it, because worry is a lack of faith. And so when someone talks about the future, I don't know what my future holds for me, because all the chaos that's going on with the elections and the whole takeover of the United States, they start having a lot of anxiety, and they say, what kind of future do I have? And a lot of times those kinds of thoughts are triggered because of a lack of faith. They don't know biblical principles. They don't know what God says about his protection, about his presence, about his provision. They don't know what God says about his person, that he's a loving God who will take care of us. They don't understand his promises, like, hey, before it really gets bad, we're going to be raptured. And so a lot of those biblical factors that would play itself into calming the person down doesn't happen, because the person is immature typically and doesn't know these principles, and if they do know them, they don't apply the truth to that situation. And so therefore, this is why worry or anxiety would be considered a sin, because it's a worry about the future that somehow doubts God's provision, God's protection, God's presence, God's promise, God's person, and all of those things that God says he will do for us. They're worried about being alone. They're worried about being abandoned. And it's like, well, God said he never would leave us or forsake us. Well, what am I going to do for my kids and my job? Well, God says he will provide all of our needs according to his glorious riches. See, those truths don't come into their head. They're just, what if, everything's going to be bad, and then they start catastrophizing, and they take it to such a level that it causes anxiety. And even when, they have a normal thing negative happen to them, that's just normal part of life, because they're anxiety oriented, worry oriented, they take it from like level 1 to the nth degree. It doesn't stay at level 1, like would just be at like a nuisance, or we got a flat tire and so we got to deal with that. No, that flat tire turns into the nth degree. They go ballistic on it. They take it to such a high level that their reactions to the negative things of life are beyond normal. And so at that point, then the person starts having functioning problems. They can't function well because every time they do something, it turns into anxiety. I've seen people that can't even leave their house. I've seen people that can't even come to church because they're just being around crowds creates anxiety. They can't leave their house because they have such high anxiety. And it's things like, if I go outside of the house, someone's going to get me. Someone's going to attack me. And so they don't even go to the store. And that's when you know that their anxieties are way beyond to the point where they need help. Where they're worried about going outside because someone's going to get them or something like that. And they can't go into a movie theater because the social crowd, they can't find an exit or something like that. Or, there's a lot of social things that they can't do because they have so much anxiety. And what ends up happening, that anxiety, that lack of faith in the Lord and His Word causes them to be a prisoner in their own making. They put themselves in their own jail. And so I think it's important to understand the ramifications of anxiety. It can cause us not to function correctly. It can cause us not to function spiritually correctly. Like if you get to the point where you're saying, I can't even go to church because I have anxiety, then you need to go get help. You need to go get some help in dealing with all of that, because that's not normal. I remember talking to a lady long time ago where she wouldn't even leave her house because she was afraid to get raped. And you want to say, that's not a normal way of thinking. So she would only leave her house if her husband was with her. She wouldn't go to the store, wouldn't go get gas, nothing. She only had to travel when her husband got home. So then they would go out to the store and whatnot. And you're thinking, you know what? That's not right. That's anxiety, no doubt about it, but that's on a whole different level. That person literally put themselves in a prison. The only way they could go was in their home. That's the only place they felt safe with, every precaution they could possibly imagine. 15 cameras, 3 watchdogs, and all the doors were bolted on the hinges and stuff. And you're thinking, something's not right here. Well, that's what I want to get into. We want to get into the causes of anxiety, because as you can see, it does damage. As you can see, it's a sin because it's related to worry about the future. And it doesn't take into account what God says. Anxiety is caused by having a non-biblical perspective, a non-biblical outlook about the future. That's what anxiety is wrapped around. It doubts. It's a severe affront to God because it doubts all the different aspects of God. It doubts His provision. It doubts His protection. It doubts His presence. It doubts His person. It doubts His promises. It doubts His preparedness. All these other things that God does for us that the Scriptures say. Anxiety cuts and it is an affront to all of that. And I'm not saying the person willfully does that. They do it a lot of times out of ignorance. They do it out of immaturity. They do it out of because they haven't been trained or discipled properly to understand these things about God. And so, because of that, their anxiety overrides their outlook. And so please understand, anxiety gives people a skewed, blurred, clouded vision, blindness perspective about reality. Okay? It actually puts the person out of reality because it will make something that's like at a level 1, a level 9, and they freak out about it. They can't control themselves and they lose it emotionally. And that, my friends, is not healthy for any believer. We can't do things like that. So we want to talk about correcting that. We want to talk about what causes anxiety and how to alleviate that in ourselves. And that's what we're going to deal with in the next upcoming episodes. So that's kind of an introduction today. And we're going to get more involved, more specific in the next few lessons. But I want to make sure that everyone understands the distinction between anxiety and stress. It is not stress. Stress comes from the outside and affects us. Anxiety comes from the inside of us, and it's due to our belief system, and it's due to an improper belief system, a skewed belief system, a belief system that's not been trained by the Scriptures, but a belief system that's been trained by trauma, by experiences, by past hurt, by things we make up in our head. And so because of that, you can never leave anxiety. It's always with you if you carry it around. Whereas stress, you can leave the stress. You can get away from a person, get away from an environment, get away from whatever is stressing you. But you can't get away from anxiety. Therefore, the solution, the cure to anxiety is to think biblically about the future and to understand what the Bible says about how God will provide those things that you are afraid of. So that's what we're going to nail down in the next coming episodes. Well, with that being said, tune in to our series on anxiety. We will do part 2 coming up, and we're going to start plowing down on the causes of anxiety. So I hope you can join us, and God bless you.